Hi, this is Eric from the Longbox Review Comic Book Podcast. Welcome to the show. Today's episode is another of my comics history from July, August 1979. So I'll be talking about comics that I purchased then, spotlighting a couple, and also comics that were out at that time that have ended up in my collection, and some notable comics as well thrown in for the mix. So let's get right to it. The comics that I purchased back then begin with DC Comics Presents number 14, which was out on July 5th. Action Comics number 500, July 19th. Marvel Team Up number 86, July 24th. And then for August, just two, Justice League of America number 172 on August 9th. And Battlestar Galactica number 9 on August 14th. So my collection is jumping up there. My collecting, I should say, is jumping up there, where I'm buying just more comics. Speaking of that, I've been keeping track of my DC versus Marvel count, and so with these comics that I purchased, or in one case purchased for me, that brings me to a total. This is the 10th, 11th, and 12th DC comics that I ended up getting at that time, and the 12th and 13th Marvel comics. So they're getting more neck and neck as time goes on. So continue to see how that pans out in the future. But anyway, just to talk a little bit about some of these comics, DC Comics Presents number 14. I vividly recall reading this in the back of my parents' car as we rode to a little place called Black Lake, which is, I want to say about an hour, maybe an hour and a half away from where I currently live. But it was where my grandparents were living in a trailer, just minutes up the road from the aforementioned Black Lake. And, we would go visit them during the summer and sometimes during Christmas, but this was a summer trip. And I remember reading that on the way up to visit my grandparents. So, which was, I think, a nice, it's a nice little memory for me. Anyway, it was probably the cover that really got my attention, with Superboy firing that kryptonite shell at his older self. What? Yes. And that will be one of the comics I'll be talking about today. More in depth, I mean. Action Comics number 500, there was a full-page ad for this in the DC Comics Presents issue, as well as mentioned in the DC Planet feature. As the ad declared, it was the first comic to reach the magic number 500, and it was the biggest blockbuster to hit comics since Action number 1. It was 64 pages with no ads for $1. $1 for 64 pages. How much is a 64-page comic now? Anyway, This is a comic that celebrates Superman by having him recount his life story, along with a plot by Luthor, of course, to replace and kill him, as Luthor is wont to do. I thought long and hard about maybe covering this issue, but it's really just a lot of, if you know the Superman mythos, it's just a lot of recapping of that stuff. I was looking for anything interesting, out of the ordinary, things that were, maybe some details that I didn't know about or anything. I didn't really find anything in there. So it was a nice issue, and has a nice wraparound cover. The background is a bunch of previous covers, and I talked about that with Superboy number 250 as well. So very similar thing halfway through that numbering, right, or double that numbering for Action Comics 500. So the back of the cover shows the rocket carrying baby Kal-El, and the front has Superman standing prominently beside Lois and Supergirl, who are holding an exercised version of the comic. And on that comic's cover is the cover again, and then again and again, like looking at your image reflected by two mirrors. So that was, I've seen that a few times on comic covers over the years. But anyway, that was the first time I'd encountered something like that. And I think this is the issue that I believe my mother bought me this when we were in the grocery checkout line. I seem to recall that. So all those years ago, my mom, even though she later did not care for me reading, or I guess buying, not reading, buying so many comics as I started to do. But she was supportive, at least in the grocery checkout line. And this might be my first milestone issue that I'd encountered, I believe. But like I said, I was going to I was thinking about spotlighting this, but then I realized there was a connection between the two that I did choose. So obviously, I already said DC Comics Presents number 14 is one of them. Marvel Team Up number 86 is the other one. And I probably got this one because I've only done a few of these episodes now, but I don't recall what was in what I talked about. But I think this is my first Marvel Team Up issue that I got. But I think I got it because it featured characters I recognized from Avengers 177 from almost a year previous, perhaps because it's Spider-Man teaming up with some members of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'll talk more about that later. Justice League of America number 172, no longer in my collection. However, it was the second part of the JLA-JSA team-up for that year, where both teams hunt for Mr. Terrific's killer on the JLA satellite. It would be years before I read the first part of that story. And then finally, Battlestar Galactica number 9, no longer in my collection either. And this is the for real last issue. Because I said before, now infamously perhaps, that a previous issue was my last Battlestar Galactica issue. This is the last one because I distinctly recall the image of the alien-possessed Adama on the cover. Besides that, I honestly don't remember anything about this comic. And it was perhaps my first exposure to Pat Broderick, I think he did the art on the cover, whom I would encounter later in Legion of Superhero comics. And then when I just discovered Pat Broderick there, I thought that was the first time I'd encountered his art. Because I remember really liking his art on Legion of Superhero comics. But obviously I'd seen him in other things. And that's kind of also another reason why I want to do this is like, when did I start recognizing artists? And what were the issues, what were their first issues for me? So comics that ended up in my collection, but I had purchased later, or they'd come out at this time, but I purchased them later. For July, Batman number 316. I'm fairly certain I bought this after I read the sequel where Jason Todd first encountered Crazy Quilt, which was Batman 368, who thought Jason was the same Robin who permanently blinded him. I wanted to see why Crazy Quilt hated Robin so much, not so much Batman, but Robin. And so I bought this issue. Plus, I loved Robin-centric stories by then. So I was seeking those out as I was looking through back issues. Detective Comics number 486, which came out July 5th as well. A while back, I decided to buy a bunch of the $1 anthologies like this, Batman Family and Superman Family as well. Or it was an attempt to buy issues with Bronze Age Robin stories. Either way, I have not read this one yet. Brave and the Bold, number 155, speaking of team-up books, which came out July 19th. Batman and Green Lantern team up in a story that was, interestingly enough, credited to Bob Haney, but apparently was written by Mike W. Barr, according to a source that I read when I was preparing my notes for this episode. So that's interesting. Time Warp number 1, July 19th. Ads for this comic book, this sci-fi anthology, were in Action Comics 500 and DC Comics Presents number 14. So I would have seen that ad reading both of those comics. However, I only bought the first five. First five? Why did my notes say first five? I think it was only 5 issues. Sometime in the last, I'll say 8 to 10 years. So, and I've not read those yet, but I've been meaning to get to those. And then finally for July 19th as well, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 256. The tagline is, to save Brainiac 5's sanity, the Legion must take over an amusement park and subject him to illusions of his past. Considering what I discussed about the reveal of Brainiac 5's insanity in issue 250 and examining the progress of, and wanting to examine the progress of Brainiac 5's treatment, this is a must read for me. So maybe after I get done recording, I'm going to go read that one. And then in August, the comics that I purchased later, Daredevil 161 came out August 7th, which is my wife's birthday. So 1979. She was 10 that day. This Daredevil 161 came out. I have to mention that to her. This is from the early part of the run of Daredevil comics I bought over the years. Despite the fact that it has Bullseye and Black Widow on the cover and it's a Frank Miller story, I still haven't read it. Like a lot of those Daredevil comics. Yeah, there was a time in, I want to say 2018, 2019. Yeah. No. Maybe even back as far as 2013. I don't remember. I have to look at my database, my comics database, where I just bought a ton of back issues for things that I wanted to read eventually. And I'm still waiting to read them. Best of DC number 2 featuring Batman. So Best of DC number 1 featured Superman stories. This is featuring Batman stories. This came out August 9th. I remember seeing this on the magazine rack and couldn't afford to get it at that time, but I really wanted it for some reason. It has a really cool, I think, painted Batman pose on the cover. Shortly after that, I still remember this after all these years, I had a dream that I was able to find a copy of that Best of DC number 2. And if memory serves, not too long after that, I did. I found it at in some back issue thing. So I don't know that I still have that one though. Now, anyway, I think this is the first time I had read the Joker's 5-Way Revenge story. So that's a pretty seminal Batman story. Superman Family number 198 came out on August 9th. Notable for being the final issue in which Superboy appears. He would go on to his second volume, which I did start collecting in a few months after this. Adventure Comics number 466, August 23rd. The Dead Man story I originally read in the Best of DC number 5, the top 10 stories from 1979 issue. The Hunter story in this I had read in the Justice Society Volume 2 trade that I got many, many years later. I did reread some of these stories, but I read that issue as part of my Adventure Comics reading a few years ago. Brave and the Bold number 156, August 23rd, Batman and Dr. Fate. I know I read this as part of my Brave and the Bold reading project a few years ago, but I do not recall anything about it, even though it features Dr. Fate with Batman. And because I bought this in part because I was always interested in whenever Earth 2 characters would show up on Earth 1 and vice versa. And plus I like Dr. Fate. So it must have been a really mediocre story, or my memory is just really bad. And then finally, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 257, which came out on August 23rd. The Legion tries to discover why RJ Brand is bankrupt. Plus it has a Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel adventure. I have not read that one either. So all this, my comics history episodes are really just to prompt me to read more of my back issues. Notable comics that came out at this time. Most of these are notable only for their milestone numbering. So that's really just going to be a list of those things. Sorry. But I find the numbering aspects interesting for comic books. So in July, Josie and the Pussycats reached 100. Marvel Comic, which is a Marvel UK printing, reached 350, and the cover features Godzilla fighting the Red Ronin in a bay. Marvel Premiere reached 50, featured the first appearance of Alice Cooper in comics, I believe. The cover was based on the Warner Brothers album by Alice Cooper and Bernie Taupin. Plot by Cooper, Jim Salicrup, and Roger Stern. For, those people that like to put their chocolate in their peanut butter and vice versa, comics and and music. And then finally, Popeye the Sailor Man reached 150. I think I mentioned this last time. It's really interesting to see comic books that reached, these high numbers back then. And nowadays, a comic book reaching 100 is a rarity. So at least for the most part, I'll just say. For August, Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse reached 200, issue 200. Starting off, though, Howard the Duck magazine, number 1, came out, as well as Man-Thing number 1, but this is the second volume featuring the character. And this is the next one is the only comic on here that's not a milestone issue, but it is notable because it is Iron Man number 128, where it begins the Demon in a Bottle story. I know I read this issue when I first got the Marvel app some years ago, but I don't recall if I read on after that. So I'm going to have to go back and check and rectify that because I've always wanted to read that story. And then finally for August, Tomb of Dracula number 1 came out. I bought the 1991 epic reprint of the Tomb of Dracula series and have read those. So there you go. That's all the notable comics for July and August. Next up, I'll be talking about DC Comics Presents number 14. As I said, that came out July 5th, 1979. It was 17 pages of story for 40 cents. The writer is Paul Levitz, penciler Dick Dillon, inker Dick Giordano, letterer Todd Klein, colorist Jerry Serpe, editor Julius Schwartz, and the cover was by Dillon and Giordano. The title or the story is entitled Judge, Jury, and No Justice, and here's the synopsis from the DC Database Wiki. Clark Kent and Lois Lane are at the Metropolis Courthouse where the Sidecar Bandits, captured months earlier by Superman in issue 336, Superman 336, stand trial. As they are about to leave the courtroom for lunch, Clark is suddenly attacked by what appears to be Superboy. Shocked at seeing his younger self in the present with him, Clark is knocked into a wall and buried in rubble. Taking this as a cover to change into Superman, the Man of Steel attempts to battle his past self. As they fight, Superboy tells his older counterpart that he has come to seal Superman's doom. When Lois tries to come to Superman's aid from the jury box, this inspires Superboy to try another approach and flies away. Superman, in order to cover for his double identity, appears to go after his younger self, but quickly switches back to his Clark Kent identity. Later, the Man of Steel searches Metropolis for his younger self, wondering how he could possibly exist in the same time period. After preventing some disasters, he suddenly hears the supersonic whine of Jimmy Olsen's signal watch and follows it to the Grand Canyon. There, Superman is struck with a kryptonite missile that knocks him out. When he revives, he finds himself fettered with kryptonite shackles and before his younger self. This Superboy tells Superman that he is going to stand trial for his crimes and reveals a ship containing Perry White, Lois Lane, Lana Lang, Steve Lombard, and Jimmy Olsen to stand in as the jury for his trial. Superman is surprised that his younger self is possessed by none other than Pete Ross. Ross explains that he wanted to come up with the ultimate revenge against Superman for leaving his son on some alien world. This happened in the previous issue. And used his contacts to find one of Lex Luthor's old lairs. There he found a device that could not only transport someone out of the past, but allow him to swap minds with them. However, when Superboy orders his captives to judge Superman, he is angered to find that they all find Superman innocent of any wrongdoing. Furious, Pete orders them to change their decision or he will kill them as well. While at Luthor's old lair, Superboy, in Pete's body, manages to break free of his bonds and escape. There he finds that the hideout is located in Smallville and goes looking for the old Kent house. Although it's boarded up and all of his old trophies have been removed, he does find a whistle left on his old dresser that could be useful. While back at the Grand Canyon, Pete decides to eliminate Superman with a kryptonite shell. With the last of his strength, Superman manages to pull the chains free from the mountainside and fall to safety. Furious at being denied killing Superman, Pete flies off into space to knock kryptonite meteors down around the Man of Steel. Superman is unable to break himself free of the kryptonite bonds. However, Pete does find opposition in the form of Krypto, who attacks him. Knocked back down to Earth, Pete is shocked to find that Superboy had escaped and freed the others. Now forced to face both a revived Superman and Krypto, Pete tearfully surrenders. Later, back at Luthor's old lab, Superboy explains that the whistle he found was the old supersonic whistle he used to call Krypto. Superman then uses the device to restore Superboy's mind to his body and return him to his own era. While Superboy flies through Smallville looking to reward Krypto for a job he will do in the future, Superman is grimly determined to help out Pete Ross no matter what. Okay, so let's start with the cover. To this day, I love this cover. It's an overcrowded mess with 4 people, word balloons, a caption box, and the title dress. But the impossibility of Superboy trying to kill himself with a kryptonite bazooka, no less, is just bonkers. And those colors. There's something about the blue of their supersuits contrasted with the green of the kryptonite that just really appeals to me, still to this day. The story hasn't even started on page 1, and I'm impressed with the choice of showing Superman in the intro box at the top of the page, being surprised, denoted by the lines encircling his head, who he's seeing on the other side of the box. Superboy, his younger self. But this story is not Superman and Superboy, it's versus. Dick Dillon does an amazing job of recreating the Smallville billboard, with Superboy bursting through it in the same pose shown on the billboard later in the issue. While I was never a fan of his work, I think it's enhanced here by Giordano's inking, but Dillon had the unenviable task of needing to draw both super characters and show them as individuals. Given how many artists have a problem depicting teenagers or children, I really appreciate the artist's work here. We see Lois Lane sans her purple eyes. Just a detail that I since I found out that Lois had purple eyes at some point in time in comic book history, when I don't see it, it just calls its attention to itself, I guess. Anyway, she misses out on a surefire way to prove Clark is Superman. So, when asked by Lois how he got to be a top reporter when he has no journalistic instincts, Clark says, "I'm not sure, Lois." And then later, when Superman arrives, just really moments later, when Superman arrives after Superboy punches Clark into the judge's dais, Lois demands to know what's going on. Superman responds, "I'm not sure, Lois." Missed opportunity there, Miss Lane. After that first altercation between Superboy and Clark, Superman thinks to himself, "That can't be Superboy. We can't both be here. Not unless time's gone mad." I don't know when I read a story that explained that in DC Comics back then. A person who traveled to the same time when his or her older self existed became I guess it doesn't matter if it's younger or older, but either way, if you're traveling back in time to some point in your history or future, I think maybe it's just the past. Now I'm all confused. Anyway, that character became an invisible phantom. And so I think this is probably my first experience with that concept, though indirectly, because we don't actually see that going on here. But it is commented on. I don't know where this bit of lore was established, but I did find a reference to Superman number 61 from 1949, where he traveled back in time to arrive on Krypton before it exploded. There's an editor's note in that issue that explained, quote, "Superman is invisible to these people because he is not of their time and doesn't exist for them." Obviously, Paul Levitz had to work out this bit of continuity for this story, as we'll learn. Not to mention, when did DC throw out this inhibition to storytelling? So yes. While Levitz came up with an interesting way around the time travel aspect, via the mind swapping thing, the next bit of plot assist is just clunky. Presumably, and I say this because we don't see her doing it, Lois dove into the jury box at some point as Superman and Superboy duked it out. In fact, in one panel, she's in a doorway, and 2 panels later, she's in the jury box. But then she jumps out of the jury box to run towards Superman, asking if he's hurt. This gives Superboy that idea that plays out later. Remember, though, and I had to remind myself of this as well, this is only a 17-page story. So certain things, certain shortcuts had to be taken, I guess, just to move the story along. Superman gets a bit cranky in the first part of this story, nearly snapping at Lois when she asks him if he's going to chase after Superboy. He says, "Should I, Lois?" And then later, when he's out patrolling Metropolis for the imposter Superboy, he helps his stranded motorist, but then chastises him for not checking his fuel level before driving. So, probably not how Superman is generally portrayed these days, but I kind of appreciate it because it makes him I don't know, a little more relatable, a little more humans. Like he's got this weird situation going on, and Lois is demanding this, and people need help, and all he wants to do is figure out why Superboy's around. Anyway, this is where things start to go off the rails even more. Superman, when he hears Jimmy's signal watch, which leads him to the Grand Canyon, Superman is blasted unconscious there and wakes up chained to a cliffside with kryptonite manacles. Superboy is nearby, holding a still smoking bazooka, which I know. How much time has passed here since Superman got blasted by the bazooka shell? Is this Superboy still affected by kryptonite, given how close they are? Or maybe that was just a shortcut for the artist to show the two characters near each other, but not, so far away. I mean, what is the distance for kryptonite affecting Superman? But I was thinking, did Superboy put on a lead suit to chain Superman up and then take off the lead suit and wait for Superman to wake up and then pick up the smoking bazooka? I don't know, just all this stuff. How does he load the bazooka with the kryptonite in the first place? Where did Superboy get a bazooka? So these are all the things that are going through my head. So, I leave it up to you to decide whether I'm being a total comic nerd with all these stupid questions. Anyway, when we learn that Superboy is really Pete Ross and why he's seeking revenge against his oldest friend, we get, I think, some unusual continuity in this team-up book because, as I mentioned, this all happened in the previous issue. Side note, if I had bought issue 13, I wonder, because it featured the Legion of Superheroes, would I have sought out their titles sooner? I don't know. I would go back in time and tell myself to do so, but then I wouldn't be able to because I'd be a phantom. I'm also trying to recall how much Superman mythos I had been exposed to by that point, or rather, I guess, Superboy mythos. Did I know that Pete Ross was his friend in Smallville and knew Superboy's secret identity, or did that come later? I'm thinking so. So I probably just kind of rolled with what I was reading in this issue until down the road, I read some Silver Age Superboy stories and got that bit of continuity filled in. And by the way, shout out to those DC digests that came out around this time, because those certainly helped with that in terms of filling in comic book history for me, at least DC stuff. Speaking of Ross, he brought Lana Lang along to be part of the jury, but she says nothing during this whole story. They were friends as well, but Levitz doesn't go there. Maybe it would have been too cliche, but it makes sense to me that she would have tried to talk him out of it by, at some point before the end. Although maybe there's some bit of history there that I'm not aware of to this day that happened between them, and she wouldn't want to do that. I don't know. It seemed like a weird oversight. The real Superboy in Pete Ross's adult body proves to be pretty resourceful. He's able to escape his bonds, realizes that he has access to his secret tunnel underneath the old Kent house, where incidentally he mentions his Legion trophies, and theorizes the odds and ends that are actually left in the house might work. In that final panel on the scene, we get a repeat of the surprised expression lines, similar to Superman on page 1. However, I have to wonder if Giordano thought Dylan's face wasn't quite emoting enough and added those lines to drive the point home. The next scene hits different all these years later. Ross, tired of being denied what he wants to hear from his hand-picked jury of Superman's closest friends, I mean, what was he thinking? Just ups and shoots at Superman, fully intending to kill him with the kryptonite shell. Luckily, Superman somehow summons enough strength to break the kryptonite chains and avoid being murdered. But Ross, the quintessential boy next door and best friend to Clark Kent in his youth, is now an attempted murderer. And they say the 80s were grim and gritty. And then there's the silly scene where Superboy is in space playing billiards with meteors. But I guess that's just a way to get the real hero of this story to appear, Krypto. The Superdog attacks Ross, tearing Superboy's costume and pushes him earthward. Krypto even rescues the jury from the flying saucer Ross trapped them in by using his paw to flip open the... And by the way, this ship it looks like a... Well, I just said, it looks like a flying saucer. I'm like, where I didn't say this earlier, but where did Ross get this flying saucer? Did he make it? Was that... I don't know. Where was it? Did it belong to Luthor? Anyway. Jimmy and Lois remove the kryptonite from the severely fatigued, perhaps even dying. I'm not really sure. They don't really depict the kryptonite in the story to be deadly, bazooka shells notwithstanding. It just mostly seems to weaken Superman. But Superman, who recovers in time to warn Ross to stand down because Krypto is now with him growling at Ross by Superman's side. Realizing his defeat, Ross sits, a tear running down his cheek. It's drawn a bit silly, but reading it now, it still carries a bit of weight to me. Here's a man who lost his son because of some stupid prophecy, and Superman allowed it to happen because of the greater good. Ross is denied his biblical justice, thank you, Krypto, and all that's left is the loss and perhaps guilt he feels, but I could be just projecting. I think if the story were told now, we would get some of that emotional weight spelled out more on the page. Again, 17 pages, right? The issue ends with a body swap, Superboy returning to the past with a promise to give Krypto the quote, biggest, juiciest T-bone steak as a reward. And Superman vowing to help Pete Ross, the man who tried to murder him, and to find a cure for his madness. I get why they want to reduce a beloved character from Superman's past to being crazy, but it completely undercuts the rage and grief Pete feels. But don't worry, Superman's on the case, right? Wrong. In issue 25, Superman mentions the last he heard, Pete was still in an asylum. So much for that vow. However, Superman and Paul Levitz does eventually make good on his promise to help Pete Ross by bringing his son John back to him, and all appears to be forgiven. Okay, that's DC Comics Presents number 14. Next up is Marvel Team Up number 86, which came out, as I said earlier, July 24th, 1979. Also 17 pages, also for 40 cents. But the writer is Chris Claremont. Guest artist, it says, Bob McLeod. Letterer, Joe Rosen. Colorist, George Roussos. Editor, Al Milgrom. From a plot by Alan Brodsky. The cover is by McLeod, and I presume Roussos did the colors as well. Anyway, the title of the story is Story of the Year, and this is the synopsis from the Marvel Database Wiki. Spider-Man is climbing the Deterrence Research Corporation Tower, formerly known as the Magnum Building, named after the man who built it, Moses Magnum. Magnum was a dealer in illegal weapons who is now missing and presumed dead, but the corporation he left behind avoided punishment for its crimes and is now doing better than ever. Spider-Man is following up on rumors that the DRC is planning a large operation. Suddenly, Spider-Man's spider sense tingles, and when he looks into a window, he sees a man rummaging through a desk. The man is Lawrence Whittier Reynolds III, Rap to his few friends, a rather arrogant ace journalism student at Columbia University. He too has heard the rumors and has come in search of a story to sell to the networks. Hearing voices approach, he slips into a closet, and a moment later, two men enter the room. One is Dr. Eric Salter, a renegade NASA scientist, and the other is Ivar Carlson, Moses Magnum's successor as head of the DRC. After adjusting some equipment and conversing, the two men leave, and the delighted student emerges and starts videotaping. He has just learned that the DRC is planning a rocket launch toward a previously unknown satellite called Dry Dock in orbit around the Earth over 1,000 miles up. Dry Dock is evidently crammed with secret scientific and military hardware, and the DRC plans to hijack it. Then a noise distracts him, and when he shines a flashlight into a darkened corner, he sees a crystalline man. Before Reynolds can ask a single question, the security alarm goes off and the crystal man bolts down a corridor. The man is Martinex, a descendant of Earth people genetically engineered to live on the planet Pluto. A time traveler from one of the Earth's alternate futures, he is a member and science officer of the Guardians of the Galaxy, a team of 31st century freedom fighters who secretly travel to the present on a mission. Martin X exits through a window, grabs a rope, and tells his companion Starhawk to pull him up. When Martin X is back on the roof, he tells Starhawk and Nikki, another Guardian, that the DRC does indeed know of their headquarters, Dry Dock, and they are planning to raid it. Fortunately, the DRC's information comes from stolen SHIELD files, he continues, so all they have to do is to prevent the assault is move the station to a different orbit. Then, using their cloaking devices, they would easily be able to hide from the DRC, provided the SHIELD data were destroyed. Just as he was about to erase the tapes, he was seen by the videotape-carrying youth and was photographed. That tape must be destroyed, he concludes, for they can allow no record of their presence on Earth to exist. Nikki quickly leaps from the roof, saying that she will look for the cameraman while they take care of the computers. Starhawk says that with even the slightest clue to the whereabouts of Dry Dock, the DRC will do everything they can to find it in order to conquer the world. This could change history so much that the Guardians of the Galaxy might actually cease to exist. Meanwhile, Rap Reynolds hides from the DRC security guards as they comb the building with orders to shoot on sight. Reynolds goes out a window and down a rope to the sidewalk, but as he starts to run away, he collides with one of the security men. The guard, Johnny Anvil, tears the videotape backpack off Reynolds, but then Spider-Man webs Anvil up and hangs him from a nearby fire escape. Anvil tells Spider-Man that the boy is a thief, but Spider-Man ignores him. Reynolds explains that his whole future is bound up with videotapes, but when Spider-Man asks what he filmed, Reynolds declines to say. Spider-Man then spots the flame-haired Nikki near Reynolds' tape deck. Before he can stop her, she pulls out the cassette and streaks away down the street. Reynolds pulls out a camera and starts taking pictures, incredulous that he has discovered an outer space hijack, aliens, and Spider-Man all in the same story. Nikki enters a taxi and tells the driver to head for 7th Avenue and 55th Street. As Spider-Man web swings after the cab, he wonders who the woman might be and why she wants the tape. The cab goes only a block before stopping, and when Nikki emerges, Spider-Man carries her onto a nearby roof. When he asks her to explain herself, she angrily refuses to talk. When he tries to take the videotape, Starhawk, who is hiding behind a chimney, attacks. He stops Starhawk with a single punch and asks for truce to talk things over, but Nikki kicks him in the stomach. Spider-Man is furious, but before he can retaliate, Martin X runs up, showing his Avengers identification, and calms everyone down. After explaining the Guardians' mission on Earth and noting that their status as Avengers is temporary, Martin X says that it is most important that Carlson is stopped. When they leave, he says no evidence can remain of their visit to Earth. Spider-Man offers to help, but Martin X asks only that he keep out of the way because their work is almost finished. On the executive floor of the DRC Tower, Ivor Carlson confronts Johnny Anvil and Hammer Jackson over the issue of Rap's escape. He says he had them released from prison because he needed good men and had been told they were the best. Then he opens a briefcase and removes a long, sinuous object that Hammer and Anvil recognize as the energy synthicon chain given to them by aliens many months ago. Hammer says that the Hulk tore the chain to bits, but Carlson replies that the DRC scientists repaired it. Further, he continues, the chain will no longer be a psychic link between them, only a physical one. They will be able to remove it whenever they wish, and they will still have the same tremendous strength that it gave them before. Later that evening, as Spider-Man web swings across the city searching for Reynolds, he muses about how incredible it is to encounter beings from a future world. Life was simpler when he was just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, he thinks to himself. He heard Reynolds' camera click just before he chased Nikki, so he promised the Guardians to retrieve the film. Preoccupied, he suddenly swerves to avoid a golden segmented chain placed in his way. Then Hammer and Anvil hit Spider-Man simultaneously, knocking him unconscious. When Spider-Man awakens, he is shackled to a wall somewhere inside the DRC tower. Carlson congratulates Hammer and Anvil for their work, and he tells Spider-Man that he caused the DRC a great deal of trouble in the past. Before he dies, continues Carlson, they will learn who he is and what he is doing there. Perhaps what they learn will enable them to create an army of Spider-Men. Spider-Man tests his shackles, but discovers that they somehow turn his strength against him, and he cannot break them. Carlson orders Anvil to remove Spider-Man's mask, but before he can, a hole melts in the wall, and the three Guardians enter. Nikki says they would have been there sooner, but they had to make sure all the dry dock tapes were erased. She shatters Spider-Man's shackles with a blaster, but Hammer and Anvil trip her with her chain. A brief battle erupts, and while Martinex and Starhawk keep Anvil busy, Spider-Man knocks Hammer out, but then Anvil swings Hammer on the chain and starts to bowl his opponents over. Starhawk blasts Anvil, but Anvil simply shrugs it off. Before Anvil can attack, Martinex freezes the Synthicon chain to nearly absolute zero. This makes the device extremely brittle, and Spider-Man snaps it with his webbing. With the chain broken, Hammer and Anvil lose their strength and are quickly webbed up. Martinex uses his Psycomp to erase Hammer and Anvil's memory of the battle. Saying that they have all that they came for, Starhawk thanks Spider-Man for his assistance. But Spider-Man replies that Carlson got away in the confusion. He tells Starhawk and the others to get away before Carlson calls the police. Moments later, Spider-Man bids the three Guardians farewell as they ascend to dry dock in a special spacecraft. Reynolds emerges from his hiding place, cursing his luck that the spaceship has departed, taking with it his $1 million story. But even though he lost his videotape, he still has his photographs. Spider-Man, however, seizes his camera and removes the film. Enraged at having the last vestige of his story destroyed, Reynolds takes a swing at Spider-Man, which he ducks. And then Spider-Man webs Reynolds' mouth shut. As Reynolds mumbles angrily that he will make Spider-Man pay, Spider-Man swings away. Wow, so it just occurred to me that there's some there's some similarities in plot between these two issues that I hadn't realized before until I read the synopses out loud. Anyway, but in particular for this issue of Marvel Team Up, on the cover, there's a lot going on here. Spider-Man appears to be falling off of a roof with Starhawk blasting him weirdly in the stomach, while Spider-Man is webbing Nikki's ray gun from her hand and Martinex is rushing toward him. So much going on here. And I'm not sure whether Martinex is supposed to be being depicted as he's running towards Spider-Man to stop him from falling, or he's pushing Spider-Man. I don't know. It's kind of weird the way it's constructed. Regardless, it was, again, there's some similarities here, right? With the hero in peril, with somebody from the future or the past, or, there's a time travel aspect is what I'm trying to say here. In case you're only familiar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of the Guardians, these three OG Guardians are Martinex, as I said, a crystalline man from the planet Pluto, Nikki, a flame-haired woman from Mercury, and Starhawk of the planet Arcturus 4, who can fire beams of coherent light, like lasers or something. He also has this, I don't know, kind of like a cosmic sense, I guess, as he says, from one who knows in the story. But anyway. Missing from the group are Vance Astro, Charlie 27, and Yondu. And remember, I said earlier, they're from the 31st century, so there's also that connection to the Legion in that way. It's funny how these things develop over time in comics. Anyway, in the issue, page 1 is a delectable Spider-Man drawing by McLeod with Spidey clinging to the building. It just looks really great. I particularly like that drawing. That'd be a really great piece of art to get. Wonder if it's available somewhere. I've never associated McLeod with Spider-Man, but now I want to read more stories by him because it's just wonderful work. It kind of reminded me of my first Amazing Spider-Man comic, issue 187, which featured a team up with Captain America. Although that was drawn by Jim Starlin, guess who inked it? Yeah, Bob McLeod. McLeod also uses some interesting shadowing, shading throughout, usually to underscore some menace or accentuate the moment. I also like how he offers some different poses or angles for the characters that I don't recall seeing in other contemporary books at that time. Roussos' colors complement this approach very well, and I particularly like how Nikki's hair is colored as flames. But I noticed that, because I looked this up, it's in the opposite order from when I first saw her in Avengers 177. So in this issue, the bottom part of her hair is yellow and the top part is red. In 177, it's the other way around. So I don't know. It's given that one of her powers is she is able to project flames from her head, because those flames, I guess, literally are flames. I guess it really doesn't matter what color they are, right? The abundance of caption boxes and thought balloons reiterate that Claremont is the writer. But I didn't feel like I was getting too bogged down in the details as I have in the past reading some of his X-Men stuff. Speaking of that, I'm trying to decide if Rap is some sort of play on DC News people, Jimmy Olsen or Steve Lombard, perhaps, or just a character, and this is what I suspect, just a character that Claremont wanted to use going forward as some sort of foil for Peter. Because there's so much page space taken up by Rap, this new character. And he almost comes across as a full three-dimensional character. He has personality and he's got motivation. He's even set up as a potential antagonist for Spider-Man at the end. But as far as I could tell, this was his only appearance. So I don't know what happened there. I also don't know if Claremont continued to write Marvel Team Up after this. It occurs to me that I don't know why exactly the Guardians are still on Earth in the present, given that they gained the temporary Avengers membership during the conflict with Korvac, as seen in the Avengers issues 167 through 177. How long ago was that? Knowing that comic book time is wonky. Based on their conversation, it doesn't seem like they are going back to the future anytime soon. So this requires some further research, or perhaps a more informed listener could fill me in on the details. After agreeing not to interfere with their mission, Spider-Man leaves to look for Rap and the filmed evidence he has, but we learned that he promised Martinex to help in this way. But why? They have no reason to entrust Spider-Man with that goal, but then we wouldn't get Spider-Man subdued by Hammer and Anvil and threatened by the head of the DRC. So, again, 17 pages, plot dictates certain things happen. Before any damage can be done, however, Anvil seems shocked or scared that the wall implodes, revealing the Guardians. It's a weird shot. He appears to be only concerned with the wall, not what's coming in through it. I wonder if there was a miscommunication between artist and writer that caused this bit of silliness. Regardless, Anvil recovers quickly as he and Hammer fight with the heroes. Nikki does state that they did indeed erase DRC's tape of Drydock's orbit, though why she was involved is unclear given that she didn't help previously. Maybe because of the heightened security? Because of Rap and Martinex earlier? Again, it's just, they were off screen and now they're not. So what comes next is a splash page showing the fight with Hammer in the foreground getting clobbered by a now free Spider-Man and Anvil in the background knocking Starhawk back into Martinex. Nikki is on the floor mid-ground, having just been tripped up by the chain, Hammer and Anvil's chain on the previous page. I thought it was a great shorthand for the action done in an unusual way because of the villain's weapon, and you have to have that perspective showing this. I can't imagine how they could do this besides the splash page. I'm sure artists out there can very easily figure it out, but I'm not that. Speaking of the Synthicon chain that the villains use, they just got it back thanks to Carlson, but Martinex uses his cold powers and puts it on ice, and Spider-Man breaks it, ending the fight. So, I kind of feel bad for him. Anyway, after the Guardians leave, we get a full circle resolution with Rap showing up and Spider-Man exposing his film, ruining his chance at his fantasized Pulitzer. Spider-Man also reveals to us that while he had some great shots of his fight with the Guardians, he exposed that film as well. He sure does seem to take the Guardians at their word. I guess that Avengers membership card goes a long way. As I said before, both stories involve time travel to some degree, one perhaps more than another. But if I had to pick one over the other, I think I'd go with DC Comics Presents, despite the great art in Marvel Team Up. Like I said, there's a pathos to the Pete Ross story that's hard to pass up, even if it's mostly hinted at or implied. While the Team Up is your typical Marvel meet cute, that is meet, fight, team up, fight bad guy, win, and the issue ends. So anyway, I enjoy both issues though, very much, and it was fun to go back after all these years and reread them and in a sense rediscover them, because I've not read these issues in 40 something years or close to 40 years, whatever it is. Anyway, if you have any thoughts about these issues or anything that I've mentioned during the course of this episode, you can send me feedback to longboxreview@gmail.com. You can leave voicemail or text me at 208-953-1841, or you can contact me via social media at Longbox Review, especially on Blue Sky, where I am most active. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.